What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my impressions for the closed beta playtest of the Expanse Osiris Reborn, which is actually going live the same day you're seeing this, I believe probably around the same time. That is, of course, possible to do because I was provided access to this via Owlcat Games pretty much right after they announced the closed beta playtest about a month ago from the time you're seeing this. However, I'm recording this towards the beginning of April because it's been in my hands for a while. So a few things to go over here. I believe this closed beta access is only available if you are a founder over on their website, which is more or less a direct pre-order. On top of that, this closed playtest here isn't like super large. It's roughly an hour-ish of content that is mostly designed to get them feedback on the game's like core systems and things. There's a lot of stuff here, but we don't also see a lot of stuff at the same time. For instance, I can't speak to most of the companions because we only see two of them, your identical twin and then Zafar in this, and Zafar is only more off-screen here. Furthermore, character creation is not in the game here for this playtest, but it will be available when the game fully launches. And we'll kind of kick off from that point here in a moment. But with that sort of intro out of the way, let's get to, I would say, the nitty-gritty straight away. Probably one of the first things that I noticed is that I hope the run animation for the available characters is not finalized because it's very stiff and kind of awkward. I'm not terribly surprised about something like that, given that Owlcat has primarily made isometric games previously, but I just want to point it out early in hopes that they continue to adjust it, that the actual move and run animation for your main character looks very odd. On top of that, there were a handful of technical things here. As you would imagine, the game is not super well optimized or anything like that right this second. I certainly had some micro stuttering here and there as I moved around, and you'll likely see some of it in this video to be real. And there was also a little bit of enemies and even your character sometimes getting stuck that, I imagine they will continue to troubleshoot as things go on. Otherwise, it is a mostly pretty positive experience, and I'll walk you through it as we go here. So, as I mentioned, there is no character creation for this closed playtest. It will be available later, but right now, your choices are between a Belter, Soldier, or Hacker, or an Earther's Soldier or Hacker variant. These are basically straight-up assaults, or characters who use more gadgets and stuff. In the full game, you'll also have access to a Martian, as well as character creation to fully customize. The way they're doing it here is, of course, a little more limited. I will say straight away, I played through both times with each, and I know there was some concern about the Belters not looking physically different, but I gotta tell you, if you play as a Belter, the first thing you'll notice is that you are several feet taller than everyone else. So it's pretty obvious straight away that you're a Belter just based on height alone. How that translates to more cosmetic features beyond that, I'm unable to really relay as we only get the one pre-made character here, so I don't know exactly what that'll look like in character creation itself. Now, beyond that, we also, of course, get a look at skills and abilities and things that will be available, though, of course, not all of them. It looks like your main combat abilities will be Shooter, Gadgets, Survivalist, and Leader, which all do more or less what you would expect. Shooter is probably the most straightforward combat option. Gadget allows you to use your equipable tools. It looks like people get 3. I don't know if that changes over the course of the game. And these do just all sorts of stuff. And Gadgets allows you to be more effective with those, even directly affecting their area of effect, things like that. Survivalist is pretty much what you would expect as well, just making sure you survive, heavily armored, that kind of thing. Leader is all about helping out your companions in combat versus yourself. So there's that. Now, exploration is interesting because you're going to have some different options there. So for this playtest, we pretty much just see persuasion and engineering, and that can be affected by things like this focus drug, which will help you raise up your engineering score, as an example, if you're playing as the hacker and get access to a few things. And then persuasion comes up to basically allow you to choice and consequence your way through the quick story here. But you can find and interact with things that you won't have the ability to use. Like, for instance, the hacker has a skill for hacking things. We just don't really see that in this playtest get used. And then you can find some things that require an analysis skill that you do not have. And so we'll definitely see more of that later for sure. And then last but not least, it looks like based on Martian, Earther, or Belter, you'll also get a personal skill or ability. For instance, the Belter gets an increase to engineering, whereas the Earther got an increase to athletics. Beyond that stuff, you have, of course, your gear and equipables. You can equip 2 weapons, 3 gadgets, 4 different subsystems of varying types, like mechanical, for instance. Digital, you'll get 2 of. These are things that go into your suit's subsystems to make you better at those things. They have all sorts of different effects, and you can only equip the limit on each type. On top of that, you have your actual decorative spacesuit. I don't believe those will actually wind up conferring any genuine benefit, but they'll change your appearance. Now, weapons are relatively straightforward. Different weapons function differently, if you'd believe it. More on those in a second, because what I want to focus here on is the gadgets. So you can equip multiple different gadgets, and these are seemingly where a lot of your abilities come from. So each gadget is something you can activate in combat, and then it goes on cooldowns, and all of that will be affected by your various systems, mainly the gadget skill, if you'd believe it. But for instance, the shooter or assault characters would get things like different ammo types, or even just a regular old grenade, whereas the hacker was a little more interesting in the sense that it affected combat a little bit more. They got like a battlefield scan that will reveal the locations of all the enemies, a drone swarm that would go to a spot and then inflict periodic damage to anything standing there. Later on with that character, I was also able to get like an armor-piercing little wrist-mounted launcher that would just destroy armor. And that one, of course, performed very, very well. But with all the abilities that allow you to like increase the size of these things that you can pick up when you level up, and then of course passively there's that. So that looks to be the basics of how a lot of the progression is going to work. And then there are levels, to be clear. You level up as you move through this particular little playtest, and it looks like when you level up, you're going to get the ability to, of course, increase your various skills and the like. So all in all, I would say it feels pretty good. They seem to be on the right track there. And now I want to talk about some more general stuff before we get into combat feel and things like that. So as far as exploration goes, this is a relatively linear early mission before you get to the parts that would open up a little more. And yet you can still explore this space station a little bit, and it, unsurprisingly, given the subject matter, kind of jumps straight into the very more grounded sci-fi of the Expanse universe. And while I'm curious about how people will wind up feeling about that in a video game in particular, as opposed to something more fantastical, I did want to talk about a few things in particular in terms of like choice and consequence and the narrative. I'm not going to get too much into the narrative in particular, and I want to talk more about the choices. So with this being a smaller experience, the main thing we see are things that are more immediately impactful, but they do show off some stuff that I think could potentially have a more long-term effect. Now, over the course of this playtest, the story here is that you're getting attacked by mercenaries that followed you from the start of the game. Early on, you have a decision to either pass a persuasion check in order to convince the people on the station to help you, that is to say, fight back against the mercenaries, or to lay down their arms and preserve their own lives, and you can just kind of let the mercs look for you as anticipated. Now, that said, this seemingly chill decision has multiple effects both in the playtest and then presumably even farther out, because if you choose not to allow the station to help you fight the mercs, or, vice versa or whatever, they will clear out an armory that you could otherwise loot, so something a little more immediate. However, if you convince the station to stand down and let you deal with this so they don't, put themselves in the line of fire, this also sees the mercenaries stealing a bunch of private servers towards the end of this mission that presumably has a bunch of data that with enough time they could crack the encryption on and find out everything there is to know about you. So you'll preserve their lives, but presumably that information that the mercenaries are going to glean from those servers eventually would come back to bite you later. But you'll get to loot the armory that was accessible. Even one step farther, you have a small section of this mission that is like only available if you make a certain decision at a certain point, and that leads you through a small area that you won't see otherwise, and that area had some unique loot that I didn't find normally through the regular version. So that's what we're looking at in terms of just this playtest, but presumably there will be more of this kind of thing later on. But that's of course a hard thing to gauge without seeing, the rest of the game as it stands. But otherwise, I want to talk a little bit about combat. So we have essentially 2 options to approach combat with for the sake of this playtest, which is, more of a straight up assault character and then the hacker character. I will say it is genuinely a bit of a trade-off, and they did feel substantially different to me. The assault character is, I think, definitely more straightforward to play because it is a, primarily cover-based shooter, so get into cover and shoot is kind of the name of that character's game, and they are unsurprisingly pretty good at it if you put points into the shooter tree. At that point, it's really just down to like the specific weapons you're using and, how gadgets can affect that at their base level as opposed to the upgraded versions. Perfectly fine way to play, and in that context, probably the most important stuff to know is how you can interact with the environment. So your companions, you'll eventually have 2 with you, but there's just 1 here for the playtest, and you can utilize an active pause or active slow really to switch to them and order them to do things like move to specific points or shoot at specific environmental hazards that will then explode and cause damage to enemies, or of course activate their own available abilities. There's also the basics of your actual health versus some shielding that will protect you from some initial damage. There's also repair foam that you can use to heal yourself up really quickly. The basics of more or less any cover shooter outside of the incredibly destructive environments. So pretty much all cover, if it takes enough damage, can be destroyed, and that is especially noteworthy in the spacewalk section, where not only are you dealing with the regular cover-based system, but a slightly more, I don't want to say like fully realized space in the sense that you can like get up and float through gravity and stuff. You're wearing magnetic boots that secure you to the outside of the station, but they do play around with some of the advantages being in different spots will treat you with, and then once you kill enemies, like they'll float off into space, that kind of thing. And it's a really fun, enjoyable experience just in that regard. But the one I wound up enjoying more was the hacker character because of how they leaned into gadgets. They still have that straight up attack enemies with the equipped weapon approach if you want them to, but he leaned much more heavily on his gadgets than of course the assault character did. This allowed you to both scan the room for the exact locations of enemies. It allowed you to send a drone swarm out to, say a far away enemy that is difficult to hit just based on accuracy, and you can pretty much eliminate them as a result. There was a gadget that allowed you to just straight up stun characters, which would pull them out of cover as well as make them a sitting duck, and that was really useful. I found that armor piercing one that was just a one-shot to all but the most armored up enemies, which was basically all of them besides a mini-boss. And speaking of that mini-boss, we do see enemies utilizing some tactics as well based on their enemy type. The mini-boss uses a little drone to heal itself that you'll have to take out once it reaches a certain point. And there is even a sequence towards the very end, like the last fight you're in, where a ship nearby can start firing onto the battlefield at the behest of a companion who is operating that ship. But I found Hacker a more enjoyable experience because of how it kind of mixed up the general cover shooter formula and made you rely on things besides just your own skill and accuracy, more or less. Speaking of your own skill and accuracy, however, this does go a little bit farther as well with the workshop. You can craft and upgrade materials. We see a little bit of that in this playtest as well. You'll be picking up a lot of materials as you move through a space, it seems, and you can spend those materials on either crafting or upgrading the stuff you already have. Upgrading stuff has a bunch of different tiers and will let you do things like reduce the cooldowns on gadgets, make weapons more accurate, or a wide variety of different effects based on both the tier of it as well as the individual item. Now, it does look to be one upgrade per tier, so there is that, and presumably that upgrade system combined with the intrinsic traits of the item you're picking up, and hopefully a unique or two along the way. And you've got the bulk of kind of how combat is going to pan out, I would say. Impressions-wise, I would say, again, I was just kind of happy to see that there was a noticeable difference between playing these characters, and I hope the rest of the options manage to maintain that feel as well. But as for this playtest, I think that is a pretty good place to wrap up impressions. I am, for the most part, pretty positive on this. They are doing a lot of good stuff here that is noteworthy. It's a little too early to draw any final conclusions, as the full release of this game is still like a year away. But this is a very promising look given, again, Owlcat's prior history with primarily isometric CRPGs. I think they're doing a good job here so far, and I will, of course, continue to take a look at this as things evolve and we get closer to that release date. But for today, that is pretty much going to do it. So certainly hope you enjoyed all of that. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about this down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.